Share screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Big enough?
Nice and
Yes.
big.
Okay. All right, we're in Parshat Tetzaveh, which is the continuation of the description of the Mishkan. Tetzaveh focuses primarily on the bigdei kehuna, the garments, the clothes that the Kohanim wore, 4 that were worn by all Kohanim, and then 4 additional worn by the Kohen Gadol, by the high priest. And that's the major content of the parsha, but it opens with a mitzvah that everyone questions its place here. I'm not sure we'll answer why it's placed here, but hopefully it will give us a good segue to in the second half of the shiur discuss a little bit about Purim, because it's scary to think that next week we will not have a parsha shiur because we'll all be recovering from however we celebrate the Purim Seudah, or maybe still be at our Purim Seudah. And then after that, it'll be Pesach before we know it.
Yeah.
Not to scare you. But that being said, the Parsha opens with the mitzvah of the menorah. V'ata tetzaveh b'nei Yisrael, v'ikchu elecha shemen zayit zach katit lamaor laha'alot ner tamid. As an aside, Hashem opens the parsha by saying, "You shall command Bnei Yisrael, and they will bring to you olive oil, which is pure, in order to light the Ner Tamid, we'll call it the eternal flame, the fire that's always there." Interestingly, from the beginning of Sefer Shmot till the end of Chumash, from his birth, this is the only parsha that Moshe Rabbeinu is not mentioned by name. So I think we've spoken about this in previous years. The most common explanation for that is because he's giving his brother Aharon a chance to shine. Right, the focus is now on the Kohanim, and so it's Moshe takes a step back and allows Aaron to be the center of attention for at least one parsha. Others say that it's actually the opposite. It's that this shows that Moshe is at such a high level that we don't even need his name, right? God just immediately begins speaking to him without even singling him out in any way. Says, "You command Bnei Yisrael," and everyone understands that this is addressed to Moshe, and that Moshe is clearly at a higher level than anyone else. But anyway, it opens with, "You shall command Bnei Yisrael, and they'll bring to you extremely pure olive oil in order to light the flame. Bo'el moed michutz laparochet asher al ha'idut yaroch oto Aharon uvanav me'erev ad boker lifnei Hashem chukat olam l'dorotam me'et bnei Yisrael." In the tent of meeting, outside of the parochet, outside of the curtain separating the Holy of Holies, which is over the edut, the testimony, the ark with the 10 commandments in it. That's where Aaron will prepare it from evening until morning before Hashem, for all generations. So, as I said, the first question everyone wants to ask, we're not really going to get into it so much on its own, but the first question is, why is this given here? So we would have thought that either it should be given in last week's parsha when we had the mitzvah of the menorah, that would be a logical place to say, and now that you've built this menorah, you should know that the instructions are that you should light it every day, continually. Or perhaps it would make more sense after we've already discussed the clothing of the Kohanim and the actual construction of the Mishkan a few parshiot later. Maybe then, once it goes into work, into functionality, that's when it would make sense to discuss the lighting of the menorah. But everyone agrees it doesn't make logical sense to include it here. But nonetheless, that's where it appears. The second thing that a lot of the commentators pick up on, we'll see this in two different sources. Number 3. We'll go to number 4 first. We'll stay in chronological order. The Midrash Hagadol, Ata Tetzaveh, you shall command. Lama lo ne'emar b'dibor v'amira ela b'tzava'ah. With all the other items and details of the Mishkan, it's Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe, God spoke to Moshe, God said to Moshe. This is the only time where it's Tetzaveh, command. And so everyone wants to know why specifically here is it given as a commandment and not as an instruction. So the Medrash answers, Lashon ziruz miyad ulidorot. It's language to imply enthusiasm. Lizarez is to hurry, to do something excitedly, with enthusiasm, quickly, immediately, and for future generations. And it tells us, Afal pi shecharav beit hamikdash ubatlu hanerot, harei batei knesiot ubatei midrashot shemalikin bahen v'hei nikrain mikdash me'at. Even after the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, and there are no more candles to light on a daily basis, we have synagogues and Batei Medrash and houses of study where we do light candles, right? Our shul, every shul has a Ner Tamid, which is supposed to remind us of the Ner Tamid that burnt in the Mishkan and in the Beit HaMikdash. So it's a commandment because, according to this, unlike other details of the Beit HaMikdash that will ultimately be discontinued, this one will endure forever, even after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. That's what the Medrash HaGadol tells us. The Rashbam says, same question, back up in number 3. Lamala hu omer, daber b'nei Yisrael v'yichuli truma, lefi sha'a l'tzorech hamishkan, aval kan shetzivui zeh l'chol hadarot, latet shemen lamaor, l'chol shana v'shana, l'kachu omer v'ata titzaveh. So again, when it came to the Mishkan, God instructs Moshe, daber b'nei Yisrael, speak to b'nei Yisrael, and they'll bring for me a dedication, because that was a temporary commandment. But here, where it's a commandment where it's for all generations to bring oil to light every year, that's why it says Ata Tetzaveh. You shall command. Shina halashon lefisha kol lashon tzava'a lidoroti. When the Torah uses the phrase tzivui, commandedness, that implies it's for all generations. Okay, and so we see that in other places as well. So interestingly, based on this diuk, based on this exact reading of the psukim, the Rambam doesn't include building the Mishkan as one of the mitzvot of the mitzvah in his counting of the 613 commandments, because the Mishkan is a temporary mitzvah, right? It was only until the Beis HaMikdash was built. But the lighting is a mitzvah that does last forever, and there's a manifestation of that even in our day, with Nerot Chanukah might have a connection to the original mitzvah of lighting in the Beit HaMikdash and the Mishkan. Down to number 5. The Gemara asks another question. What's the function of the Mishkan? Why are we building this Mishkan? V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tochan. They shall make for me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. If that's the case, the Gemara in source number 5 asks, why the need for the light? This is a place for God to reside. Does God need light to see?
We need light to see.
We need light to see, but God doesn't need light to see. So the Gemara tells us Right, the Torah says, Tetzaveh b'nei Israel v'ikchu elecha shemen zayitach. Command b'nei Israel, they'll take to you pure olive oil. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, elecha v'loli. They shall bring it for you, but it's not for me. Lo le'ora ani tzarich. I, God, don't need any light. I don't need the light. The light, as Cheryl says, is for the humans. God has no need for the light. So that's why it says Vikhu Elecha, which makes it even more curious that that it's for all generations, right? If it's only for us, it's even a bigger stretch, perhaps. Let's go down to number 7, the Abarvanel. So again, the same basic question: why is the commandment given v'ikchu elecha? They'll bring it to you. The Barbanel says v'ikchu elecha sheiched hadlakat hanerot leMoshe, that the lighting of the candles was specified or designated for Moshe. Lagid kedivrehem shehu yitbarach lo hayat tzarich leora, in order to emphasize what the rabbis taught us in the Gemara we just saw, that God has no need for the light. Aval hayat tzarich haor shama mipnei hanichnas mehechal shir'eh lifneihu nichnas v'omed. The need for the light was for any human that entered into the Beit Hamikdash, into the Mishkan, in order to know before whom they stand. Ulefisha Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom haya nichnas b'chol eit el hakodesh v'chein amar v'ikchu elecha. Since Moshe was the one who most frequently entered into the Kodesh, into the holy part of the Mishkan, that's why it says Vikchu elecha, they shall bring it to you. Right, is to say that it's for your benefit, Moshe, because you're the one who's going to use this light. The light is not for me, says God. So we have this mitzvah, this oddly placed mitzvah, to kindle a light in the Beit Hamikdash constantly. And we're told that this mitzvah is not for God's benefit, but is for the benefit of those who will enter into the Mishkan to serve and to worship. Let's go back to 6, and then we'll go to 8. So the header for 6 is on the first page, but the text is actually on the second page. This is the Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch says that we have a mitzvah, the 98th mitzvah in his counting, Leitiv Neirot Tamid Lifnei Hashem Yitbarach, to constantly have candles lit before Hashem, Shne'emar Yaroch Oto Aharon Uvanav. Says further on in Parsha, in Sefer Shmot, that Aaron and his children shall arrange it. Klomar Yaroch Haner Lifnei Hashem Yitbarach V'zeu Mitzvah Tavat Hanerot Hanizkeret B'Gemara. That is to say that they shall place and organize and arrange the candles in order that they be ready and set for use as the Gemara explains. Mishar Shea Mitzvah. What's the reasoning for this mitzvah according to the Sefer HaChinuch? Shetzivanu Hashem Yiparach li'oner dolek b'Beit Hamikdash lehagdalat habayit lechavod u'letifaret be'inei haroim. Unlike the Abarbanel, who says it was for the benefit so Moshe and anyone else who goes in could see, he says it wasn't to enable seeing, but it was in order to bring a more dignified existence or experience to the Beit Hamikdash. Kikein derech b'nei ish lihitkabed b'bateyim b'nei rotz dolkim. Right, you want to set a proper ambiance, you light candles. You have lights burning, right? So that sets a proper, that shows that this is an important place. V'chol inyan hagdala bo kedei sheyachnisa adam b'libo kishiyirehu morav anava. So the whole point of it is that when a person sees these candles burning, they'll have a sense of humility and of awe for the place where they are. Ukvar amarnu. We've already said that, right? This is the big guiding principle of the Sefer HaChinuch, that the soul is drawn after the actions, right? That the the actions that a person does make an impact on their spiritual state. And so the same is true with the environment. The environment will make an impact on a person's soul. Right? And he says another important foundation is that all that we have, all the mitzvot, is from the perspective of those who receive it. Right? The mitzvah is only given for the benefit of for the perspective of the humans who are getting it. Don't think that the light has anything to do with Hashem. And then he says, just as a really curious comment, Imiyoti ma'amin be'emet ki yesh lemekubalim be'inyanim eila chachamot nichbadot v'sodot niflaim. Says, in truth, the Kabbalists have many, many wonderful insights and thoughts about this light. Many wonderful thoughts and insights. But ulam gam anachnu nichtov hanirah kipshutan shel dvarim. But we're just going to stick to the pshat. Right? The Sefer HaChinuch says, I am not a Kabbalist. I'm not going to get into any of these mystical explanations of what the light may represent, but you should know that there are many beautiful explanations about it, but I'm going to stick to the pshat. I'm going to stick to the simple understanding of it. So again, in the spirit of the Sefer HaChinuch, I don't want, we could easily get sidetracked into a lot of the beautiful Kabbalistic and Hasidic insights into what the light represents, how each Jewish soul has a wick that has to be kindled, and we have to find inspiration, and there's all sorts of beautiful things that you can think about, about the connection with light, with fire, with the inner soul. But we're not going to dwell on those explanations, but we should just recognize that they are there. That much of the commentary on this pasuk, on this mitzvah, focuses on how it might translate for a more spiritual, personal message, which are quite beautiful, quite nice. I've been talking for a long time. Are there any questions or comments on what we've seen so far?
The lighting inside the Mishkan would have been constant, correct? That is 24/7.
Not necessarily. I think we spoke about this last year or 2 years ago, the concept of Tamid. We translate it as constant, but it doesn't necessarily mean constant, right? It says that they lit it in the evening until the morning. Ideally, yes, but if it went out, there's questions whether you have to relight it or not. So not necessarily constant, but that's the idea that's conveyed.
Why would they not relight it if the Ner Tamid went out?
It's a question if they would, if they had to, if it's a mitzvah to do it.
It's a matter of kavod.
If it's a matter of kavod, then yes.
The place where they're lighting the Mishkan, I would suggest, is the equivalent of the throne room of a human emperor, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And unlike normal people who can't afford to, quote unquote, waste valuable olive oil and such things to burn during the day or a cloudy day or all night long, in the throne room, it's always illuminated because the glory of the king is always in effect present, being recognized. It's special. Other thing that I would mention, that's a curious sort of contrast. One of the largest religious constructions that the Romans ever made in antiquity was the Pantheon, right, which was a place of worship for many different deities. And the illumination in the Pantheon was from a huge skylight, an open area in the center of the domed roof, which has been stable and has survived ad hayom hazeh, almost 2,000 years. It's absolutely remarkable. It's still being used now as a Catholic church. And that image of the light from the sky or starlight, moonlight coming down into this vast space is an impressive thing. But in the case of the Mishkan, the only people who would be going in would be the designated Kohanim, Leviim to do some work, and Moshe, who's a special case.
Yeah. There would be a possibility for others to go in if they're bringing a korban, certain parts of it. But yeah. Derech Agav, as a side note, I know I've quoted many times in the past Rabbi Et Shalom from Los Angeles, who has some wonderful shiurim audio. So when I'm in the car, I often will listen to him. He just told as sort of an aside, and I didn't see much more discussion about this, but he said that he was once in Israel and driving down somewhere near, I forget where, doesn't really matter. And a Christian person had set up on the side of the road a model of the Mishkan. And so Rabbi Et Shalom stopped and he goes into this model. He said that he realized then an amazing thing. The Mishkan was a tent, right? Yeah. It was an elaborate tent, an elaborately built tent, but it was a tent. And as a tent, it had a cover, it had cloth coverings all over it, whether it was seal skins or whatever it was made out of, but it was covered. So if you were to go into the Mishkan, even during the daytime, it was dark. And what he saw in this model of the Mishkan, and I know there's one up in Amish country also. I think there's one of the groups built a replica of the Mishkan there too. So you go into this dark tent, and then the light from the menorah shining off all the gold vessels really does create not only allow you to see in what otherwise would have been a dark tent, but creates a really remarkable, beautiful setting for it as well. So there is something very strong about the aesthetics of this, which might not have been quite as relevant once we made it to the Beit HaMikdash, but certainly, which was a huge structure with lots of open air. But certainly in the Mishkan, there was this functional purpose as well. The Meshech Chachma says something really interesting. I'm not sure totally what to do with it, but he says as follows. Afal Pisha Amru Kol Dibrot Shenibar Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe Lo Haya Ela Bayom Shene'emar Bayom Daber Hashem Al Moshe. Says generally when God spoke to Moshe, it was during the daytime, right? Shene'emar Bayom Daber Hashem Al Moshe. It says once in Sefer Shmot in the day when God spoke to Moshe. So we learn from that. Okay, so therefore every time God spoke to Moshe, it was presumably, or the default case was, it was during the daytime. When these candles were lit, it was as if it were day. And therefore, if the candles were lit, God could speak to Moshe even at nighttime because of the candles in the Mishkan, because of the candles on the menorah. And then he says a little bit later, he quotes the Sma of one of the commentators on the Shulchan Aruch. They wrote, "Dulukim mutar ladun balayla." Generally, a beis din does not convene at nighttime, but if there are candles burning, then the beis din can convene at nighttime. So there's something transformative about these candles, about this light, that it's not only to provide light, to provide a nice, beautiful setting, but that it fundamentally makes it as if it's daytime, which is, again, I don't know fully what to make of that, but it seems like a pretty interesting comment on the light. One more idea about the menorah before we transition a little bit to Purim. Rav Hirsch quotes the Medrash Sifra, which says "Laha'alot ner tamid," that they have to bring you the olive oil in order to, literally, we would translate it as "Leha'alot ner tamid," to cause the ner tamid, the eternal flame, leha'alot, to go up. And so the Sifra says, "Shetehe shal hevet ola me eleha," that the flame should ascend on its own. Right? You don't want. I think what it means to be saying is you don't want the flame to be dancing and jumping all over the place, but it should be a steady, constant flame going up, right? Well fueled, without any interference or wind or anything. Rav Hirsch has a beautiful, beautiful insight on this. Again, really on its own. I'm not sure that maybe it will connect what we're going to say in a moment, but just a beautiful insight based on the Sifra. This expression of ascending, describing the act of kindling a lamp, is only employed in respect to the candelabrum of the tabernacle. It alludes to the action of the priest in applying the flame to the wick, which is ready to be kindled continually, until the flame ascends of its own. And now he applies it to our relevance in our life. The task of the teacher of Judaism is to make himself superfluous to his pupils. It is not his function to keep the people, the ordinary folk who receive instruction from him, continually dependent on him. And that's what he sees in the symbolism of allowing the flame to go up on its own. That the teacher, right, the teacher is the flame being applied to the wick. The teacher should inspire and provide the initial spark, the initial energy, but with the hope that the students will pick up what the teacher is teaching in order to be able to burn and provide light on their own without constantly needing that external supply of the teacher's light and fuel. Which I thought was just a beautiful application of all this. Okay, we're about to transition to discussion of Purim. Are there any other questions or thoughts on what we've seen in the Mishkan and the menorah so far? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Purim. The Gemara tells us, right? The Gemara has a long conversation about, right, where do we see allusions to figures, stories, incidents in Nach, in Nevi'im and Ketuvim? Where do we see precedent or allusion to these in the Chumash itself? So the Gemara asks, right, another famous example of this, when it says Haman min haTorah minayin, where do we know that Haman, where do we see allusion to Haman in the Torah? And it points us back to the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Chava eat from the tree. Hashem tells to them, Hamin ha'etz asher tziviticha lo tochal achaltem. Did you eat from the tree that I told you not to eat from? Hamin ha'etz, from the tree. If the letters Hamin spell Haman. So Haman indicates right, lack of attention to the laws, to the rules that were set into place, perhaps to the Yetzer Hara, and that's the original allusion that we have of Haman. So the Gemara asks, what's the original source of Esther? Esther min haTorah minayin. I'm in source number 11. Shene'emar va'anochi haster astir et panai. God tells the Jewish people that if they do not listen to what Hashem commands them, and if they sin and are exiled, then the day will come when God will surely hide God's face from us. Anochi haster astir, which is the same shoresh, the same root as Esther. So that's the source for Esther. Esther, right? And we're told that, right, the entire message of Megillat Esther, of the holiday of Purim, is, right, it's God's name is not found once in Megillat Esther. God is literally hidden. And so, right, that might be another reason why we wear costumes, is because we need to get beyond the surface, because it should be abundantly clear to anyone who reads the story that Hashem is definitely directing everything that happens, every detail, but you need to dig a little deeper in order to see it. And so we wear costumes perhaps to teach us that we can't just look at things on a surface level, we have to dig a little bit deeper. And then we have a second idea about Purim. I hope, I promise, I don't promise, but I think these will all come together in just a couple minutes. The second idea about Purim is found first in the Yalkut, source number 12. Eze Shem Tov Shekanta. What's the good name that Esther acquired? Shekol HaMoadim Atidin Libatel V'Yimei Purim Einan B'Telim Le'olam. All holidays in the future will be nullified, will be canceled out. Does that mean we're not going to celebrate Pesach? I'm not sure. No one knows exactly what it means. Most assume we'll still celebrate the holidays, but maybe the reasoning or the emphasis will change. But Purim will never be nullified. We'll never cancel. We'll never have any changes to Purim. Right? The same is said about Megillat Esther. That all the books of Tanakh are going to no longer be read, but Esther will always be there. And the Rambam says as well in Hilchot Megillah, Kol sifrei haneviim v'chol haketuvim atidim libatel limot haMashiach chutz mimegillat Esther. When Mashiach comes in the days of Messiah, all the books of Nevi'im and Ketuvim of Nach will be nullified except for Esther. Esther will endure just like the 5 books of the Torah. And like the oral law, which is never canceled out, which is never nullified. Right, this might be the real explanation of what this Medrash is getting at. He says that the memory of all of the other troubles or sorrows that befell us is what will be canceled out, right? Either because things are going to be just so glorious and so happy in the days of Mashiach, or we're going to be emphasizing a greater miracle about the arriving of the Mashiach. We're going to forget the quote minor miracles of the holiday of Pesach and Sukkot, etc. But that won't happen with Purim. So even though all the sorrows of all the other days will be nullified, Yemei Purim lo yibatzlu, the days of Purim will never be nullified. Shne'amar Yemei Purim ha'ela lo ya'avru mitoch ha'yodim zichram lo yasuf mizaram, as it says, these days of Purim will never be canceled or never leave from the Jews, and their memory will never be canceled from their descendants. So we have this idea that Esther and Purim have some special status that other holidays and other books don't have. As an interesting aside to this, the Ravid, who is the very famous critic of the Rambam, says right here, continuation of source number 13 in the at the bottom there. Amar Avraham davar hedyatut huzeh. This is foolishness. Ki lo yibatel sefer mikol asfarim she'ein sefer she'ein bo limud. He says no book of Tanakh is going to be canceled out. There's no book that doesn't teach us something. Aval kach amru afilu yibatzlu shar sfarim milikrot bahem megillah lo tibatel milikrot. So he says it just means, right? It just means that even if we will no longer read in public from the other books of Tanakh, we will always read in public from the book of Esther. Let's go first to number 15, then we'll go back up to number 14. Number 15 tells us that when Mordechai and Esther at the end of the Megillah sent out the letter to the Jews saying that Haman's decree is reversed, and rather than prepare for war against us, we should go to battle against our enemies. It says that they sent them divrei shalom ve'emet. He sent them words of peace and truth. Amar Rabbi Tanchum v'amar le Rabbi Asi. So there's a teaching in the name of Rabbi Tanchum, or perhaps in the name of Rabbi Asi. Milamed shetzricha sirtut ka'amita shel Torah. They learn from this a halacha in Megillat Esther, that Megillat Esther needs to be scored like the lines of a Sefer Torah. Amita shel Torah, which literally means like the truth of Torah. So this seems like a very strange, first of all, why? But also it's a very strange phrase to use, Amita shel Torah, like the truth of Torah. What does it mean, like the truth of Torah? So Rashi tells us in number 16, Kesefer Torah atzmo sartut halacha lemoshe misinai. It has to be just like a Sefer Torah, and this law of scoring the lines is an oral tradition that Moshe got at Sinai. And perhaps the philosophical explanation for this is offered by Rabbi Yitzchak Mirsky, who says, Megillat Esther ma'alata kesefer Torah, the status of Megillat Esther is compared to a Sefer Torah. Shekain Kabbalat Torah shekilu yisrael meratzon ketuvah b'Megillat Esther, because we have a tradition that in Megillat Esther there was the willful and willing acceptance of Torah by Bnei Israel, right? The Torah tells us, the Gemara tells us famously that when the Jews first were given the Torah at Har Sinai, that God kipale har kagigit, that God suspended the mountain over their heads. He said, accept my Torah, if not, I'm going to drop this mountain on top of your heads. So the Gemara says, well, that if that's the case, then we have a really good reason why we shouldn't be bound to keep the Torah. We were forced into it. And the Gemara responds, even though that's the case, they accepted it willingly in the days of Achashverosh, as it says in the Megillat Esther, Kimu v'kiblu, Kimu mashakiblu kfar. It says in Megillat Esther, they Kimu v'kiblu, they established and they accepted, just to say they established that which had previously been accepted. So since Megillat Esther represents the willing acceptance of Torah, therefore it's equated to Torah in this way. Perhaps that's also why it attains the halachic status of a Sefer Torah, as far as how it's going to be treated when Mashiach comes. Okay. Some interesting stuff, and I hope now it's all going to come together. The Midrash Tehillim tells us as follows. Davar acher, mizot hanishkafa kemo shachar, right? So it quotes a pasuk from Shir Hashirim, right? Who is this who appears like the dawn? Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, hayu mehalchim bekartzuta behada bikta da arbel, ra'u ayelet hashachar shebaka ora la'alot. These two rabbis are walking together, and they see the break of dawn, the ayelet hashachar, the first crack of dawn. Amarlo Rabbi Chia, kach hi geulatan shel Yisrael. So Rabbi Chia comments, just like this dawn, like the rising of the sun, that is what the redemption of the Jewish people is going to be. Amarlo Rabbi Shimon, haynu dichtiv ke'eshev b'choshech Hashem orli. And this is, right, Rabbi Shimon says, yes, that's the meaning of the verse that says, when I sit in darkness, or though I sit in darkness, God is a light for me. B'tchila hi ba'a kima kima. At first, the redemption of the Jews comes in itty-bitty steps, piece by piece. Achar kach hi menafetzet uba'a, then it becomes more pronounced. Achar kach hi para uveraba, then it spreads out. Achar kach hi mishtabechet v'holechet, and then it's really bright and continuous and ongoing. Kain b'tchila u'mordechai yoshev b'shar hamelech. So the same is found, it says in Megillat Esther. At the very beginning, we see that Mordechai was sitting at the gate of the king, right? Not really any real indication of redemption, but okay, so once we can see that there's something special about Mordechai, right? So that's the first step in the redemption. Achar kach vayhi kirot hamelech et Esther hamalka, and then we have when the king saw Esther, when she came to him the first time to invite him to the party, Achar kach vayikach Haman et halavush v'tasus, and then we have the whole thing with Haman dressing Mordechai up in the king's clothing and riding him on the king's horse. Achar kach vayitzlu et Haman, and then it gets to the point of they hanged Haman. Achar kach atem kitvu al Yudim, and then Achashverosh tells Mordechai and Esther to write to the Jews that they can go to battle against their enemies. Achar kach Mordechai yatzar mifnei hamelech b'yavush malchut, and then at the very end, Mordechai goes in front of the king wearing royal clothing. Achar kach la'udim hayta ora. And then at the very end, it says the Jews had light. Okay, so it's an unfolding process, so the entire Megillah that starts with baby steps, and it's likened to the rising of the sun. Okay, so that's what Megillat Esther is. That's what the story is. That's what the story of Purim is. It's like the breaking of dawn, the rising of the sun, gradually coming into view until it's just so overpowering. And the culmination of all this is the pasuk we say at the end of the Megillah. We say it in Havdalah every week. That the Jews had light and joy and happiness and preciousness. What was that? Okay, so let's try to bring this all together now. The Torah Tamima. Kifi Dimashma Rambam Sof Hilchot Megillah, source number 18. Right, we've already seen the Rambam at the end of Megillah. Have a perush zichavon hatzavot mikol hamoadim yu betilim shali zachu od. Right, what does it mean that Purim and Esther will never be nullified? It means that the sorrow, the suffering, the bad parts of all the other stories will be canceled out and not remembered. Right, but the memory of the entire story of Purim will always endure. And so we'll accept that, right? Umipi Abba Mori Shlita, Shamati Leparesh, Takavanahi, Dibazeh Chiluk Nes Purim Minisei Shar Hamoadim. He quotes his father, who says that this is what differentiates the miracle of Purim from other miracles, such as Yetziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, the giving of the Torah, the clouds of glory, which are represented in the Sukkah. Diba'od shehim hayu nisim gluyim she'ein listapek mehem, kinenis Purim afal pisha kol haya me'et Hashem, afal pichein haya kol inyano b'derech hateva. These other holidays, these other miracles were supernatural. They were out of the ordinary. They were nothing that could have ever been expected. They were 1000% obvious miracles to anyone who saw them. When it comes to Purim, the miracle happened in the natural course of events. Again, you could read the Megillah and never encounter God's name, never encounter Hashem. You can read the Megillah and just see it as another history book, another thing out of what happened. Everything happened in a natural way. And the difference, he says, between Purim and the other holidays, Purim afal pi shakol hayameit Hashem afal pi chen hayakol inyano b'derech hateva be'ofen shemisha libo chalak me'emunat Hashem yachol lifrosh hakol b'derech hateva. Right, anyone who is separated from God could understand everything in Purim as a natural course of events. Zehu she'amar im gam nisim gluyim kamo b'chol hamoadim yifsaku aval nisim hamuchasim b'darchei hateva le'olam lo yibatlu. And this is the meaning, that even if there will be no more overt supernatural miracles like the other holidays celebrate, but those miracles which are embedded into the natural course of events, those will never be nullified. Those will never stop. K'fi sheyireh b'chol dor vador, u'mistakel b'halichot olam bichlal u'b'chayei Yisrael bifrat. And this is true if you look at the unfolding of human history in any era, in any age. It's true that you could explain all that happens as a natural course of events, but if you properly understand what's happening, it's impossible to deny God's hand in all that happens. And with that, I want to try to tie together our two ideas. We started the shiur by talking about the Ner Tamid, the light of the menorah, the light that was kindled every day in the Mishkan, that was not for God's benefit, for our own benefit. And that was that is the embodiment of the beginning of our parsha this week. And that has all this beautiful symbolic explanation behind it. And the same is true, I think, when it comes to Megillat Esther. When it comes to Purim, to Esther, right? That the miracle is defined in terms of the light, in terms of the emerging light that was hidden at the very beginning. Everything was hidden, right? Anochi haster aster panim. It's a holiday of God's hiddenness, of not being able to see God. But when we let that light shine in, when we open up our eyes to be able to perceive the divine light that's all around, so then we're able to see it everywhere, and that's when the miracles really start to unfold and the salvation for the Jews happens and comes out in earnest. And to conclude it, the Gemara in Megillah, and we quoted the pasuk already, says about this pasuk, La'adim hayta ora v'simcha v'sason vikar, that the Jews had light and joy and happiness and preciousness. Says the Gemara, Amar of Yehuda, Ora Zo Torah, or the light that they had represents Torah. B'cheinu Omer Kiner Mitzvah v'Torah Or, and it says that a candle is a mitzvah and Torah is light. Simcha ze Yom Tov. Simcha refers to holidays, to Yom Tov. B'cheinu Omer v'samachta b'chagecha, as it says, you shall rejoice on your holiday. Sason zo mila. Sason, joy, refers to the mitzvah of Brit Mila. V'cheinu Omer sason ochi al imartecha. As it says, I will rejoice over your words. Vikar elu tefillin, and preciousness refers to tefillin, or honor, as it's translated here, refers to tefillin. V'cheinu Omer v'aru kol me'aretz kishem Hashem nikra elecha v'yaru mimeka. As it says, all the nations of the world will see that the name of God is called upon you, and they will fear you. B'tanya Rabbi Eliezer Agadol Omer elu tefillin sheberosh. This refers to the tefillin of the head, the visible tefillin. So by the end of Megillat Esther, we become the embodiment of that light of salvation, that light of God's presence that was so hidden at the beginning, becomes the very embodiment, the very manifestation of our celebration, of what the miracle is all about, of what the holiday is all about, of what Megillat Esther is all about. So it's it's not a direct connection, but I think that reflecting on the significance of the menorah and the light of the menorah brought in our parsha hopefully helps us to appreciate how it might play into the story and the holiday of Purim that we're going to, please God, celebrate next week. This time will be the after party, I guess, right? But hopefully, if you haven't signed up for the Shul Seuda and are planning to come, the deadline is tonight. So please sign up for that. We would love to see you there. The schedule for all of the Megillah readings, davening, was sent out last night and is posted on the Shul website. We have Shabbos, this coming Shabbos, we'll read Parshat Tetzaveh, we'll read Parshat Zachor, and we'll see everyone again Monday night for Purim. Are there any final questions or thoughts on any of this? All right. See you next week. We won't see you at the Suda next week, but not on Shir. We'll resume in 2 weeks with the learning.
See you on Shabbos.
Okay, take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thanks.